Kev, just give me your overall thoughts on the initial matchup between the Denver Nuggets and the Miami Heat in the NBA Finals.
I mean, I think the matchup is, of course, going to be entertaining. Let's not pretend and sit like this isn't going to be a very, very watched finals. Just because LeBron James isn't in it or anything like that does not mean it's going to be any less fun. You have the narrative of the best team in the league, finally healthy, in the NBA Finals for the first time in franchise history, going up against a team that not a soul thought would be here, including Miami fans. I don't want to hear it. I know most of you, if not all of you, chose Milwaukee in that first round series. But again, neither here nor there. We're past that. Um, the supporting cast of this team has been electric, lights out. It's consistently brought up 7 undrafted players. They've played their asses off. They've all stepped up and hit big shots. They've all stepped up and played good defense. This is a very well rounded team, a very well coached team, a team led with a lot of veterans. We all know Udonis Haslam doesn't play, but he is the OG of the team behind obviously Kyle Lowry, who's 36, 37 years old. Jimmy Butler's in his 30s. Kevin Love is in his 30s. This isn't a young spring chicken team. Kyle just went down the list of the players that have already played in the finals, and some of them are still on this team from the run that they had gone on a couple of years ago in the bubble. So when you look at experience, you have to kind of give the edge to Miami in that sense. But from an overall talent perspective, you have the two-time MVP in Nikola Jokic. You have arguably one of the better point guards in the Western Conference in Jamal Murray. When Michael Porter Jr. is hot, he can go and knock down big shots from behind the arc. Obviously, Bruce Brown had a great couple games in that Western Conference Finals, and he showed up. Caltavius Caldwell Pope had
Contavious.
some Contavious Caldwell Pope. Thank you. Had some incredible games. The 3-and-D guy. This is going to be a good, entertaining finals. The biggest thing I'm looking at: who's gonna guard Nikola Jokic, man? If Anthony Davis couldn't do it, you think Bam's gonna do it? That is the only reason why I am like so scared for Miami, because it's like, if Jokic wasn't as good of a passer or if he wasn't as dynamic of a scorer, maybe this would be a little simpler to an extent because he could still do everything, just not as effectively. But the fact that this man can walk down the court and what seems to be get his own rebound, pass himself the ball, and score, because he's a walking triple double at 7 feet tall, which is just an anomaly in and of itself. He is the X factor for this series as a whole. So I'm curious to see what Spo is going to do in terms of combating the triple threat that is Nikola. And I'm also curious to see if the lights are going to be too bright for some of the younger cast of the Heat. Will Caleb Martin be able to do this in the most important stage? Will Gabe Vincent be able to do this in the NBA Finals? Will Duncan Robinson go cold and disappear? We don't know. But if for whatever reason Miami can make this competitive and find a way to get the ball out of Jokic's hand, maybe get him into foul trouble, whatever the case may be, I think this has the potential to go 6 or 7 games, because Miami has beaten teams that are flat out more talented and better in multitudes of positions. Now, in none of these games were the center the focal point of the team, which would therefore make everything that much harder because it's going from inside the paint, kicking it on out. But Nikola Jokic isn't your everyday center. He brings the ball up. He is able to facilitate. He is able to play good defense. He's kind of a jack of all trades. So again, I'm curious to see how the series goes, but I am very excited because Miami should not be here. They have beaten a great amount of teams. They are very well coached, and Jimmy Butler just does not seem like he's done. I mean, for God's sakes, Jimmy Butler had no emotions at that Eastern Conference trophy presentation. Everybody's cheering. Bam Adebayo's going crazy, picking up the trophy. Jimmy is just no smile, no smirk, no emote, nothing. He's focused on winning a chip, and I think that the chip on his shoulder is going to make this a lot more entertaining than people are anticipating. But I look forward to the NBA Finals finally starting on Thursday.
Yeah, I think this series is going to be an interesting one simply just because we have this number 1 seed going up against a number 8 seed. And, it's the first time that this has happened in quite some time. I'd have to look up the Spurs and Knicks series
That's what I'm doing right now.
because I know the Knicks were definitely the 8 seed. I just don't remember whether or not the Spurs were the number 1 seed. But nonetheless, when it comes to this specific series, I'm not like having a prediction. I'm just basing it off of what I see on paper and what I've seen throughout both respective playoff run from each team. It seems to me that Denver is the
San
better
Antonio
team.
was the number 1 seed.
Okay. So it's the first time that's happened probably what 23, 24 years.
Something
Like
like that.
that. All right. So it's been a while. It doesn't happen that often, but nonetheless, I guess some things come full circle every 20, 25 years or so. So we'll see it play out once again. But when it comes to how I look at this series, to me, it's like Kev said. I think just from an overall talent perspective, Denver's definitely the better team here, especially when you have Nikola Jokic, who's just been an absolute monster for Denver the entire time that he's been in the playoffs throughout this stretch for Denver. And to me, you could even make a case that Jamal Murray was really the MVP of that Western Conference Finals series with just the amount of points that he was able to get behind the 3-point line. Granted, I know that Nikola Jokic gets a bunch of shine just based on the fact that he can go out there and get at least 25 and 15 like it's nothing, like it's a walk in the park. But to me, the fact that Jamal Murray was so effective behind the 3-point line in the Western Conference Finals series against the Lakers, it's definitely going to be something interesting that Miami's going to have to contend with because, not only can Jamal Murray shoot well behind the 3-point line, KCP can really light it up behind that 3-point line whenever he gets some open looks. And like Kev said, if Michael Porter Jr. is hot and if he gets into a rhythm, man, you're talking about 3 potential sharpshooters behind the 3-point line with Jamal Murray, KCP, and Michael Porter Jr. Miami's going to have to make some really good adjustments to try to counter that because Denver has effectively shot the 3 ball very well in their playoff run so far, and they have a very good chance to be able to do that once again going up against the Miami Heat. Now, when it comes to the Heat have gotten here based off of a few factors. They have shot extremely well from the field, especially behind the 3-point line, and they have played fantastic defense when they needed it the most. Like Kevin and I just talked about in Game 7 for Miami. They played outstanding defense against Boston. Held them to under 85 points in the most important game of the year for Boston. And did it on the road. And that was despite the fact that Boston had all the momentum going into that Game 7 in the Eastern Conference Finals. Didn't matter. Miami went into Boston's house and honestly gave it to them from a defensive perspective. They just brought more intensity. They ramped up the pressure, and Boston folded. When it comes to how they're going to present a defensive challenge against Denver, it's going to be a lot different. Because like Kev said, Jokic is going to be a nightmare for them. Simply just because I don't think they have a piece to be able to really counteract him. Bam is not somebody that I would really rely to get key and crucial stops against Jokic because Jokic is too versatile. I mean, granted, you might get a situation where Jokic and Bam are playing one-on-one, but if the situation is not there for Jokic to attack the rim, he could just kick it out to KCP, Michael Porter Jr., or Jamal Murray, and they could just light it up behind the 3-point line. So if Miami overplays their defense against Jokic, they put too much pressure on him, Jokic has plenty of options to kick it out to for some open shooters. And that's what the Lakers struggled with. The Lakers played some pretty solid defense at times against Jokic, but when they overplayed their help against Jokic, he was able to kick it out effectively. And Michael Porter Jr., KCP, Bruce Brown, and Jamal Murray, they knocked down some huge 3-point shots for Denver. And when you're presented that type of offensive weaponry, Miami, I think, is going to have a very difficult time to be able to slow down just the general offense that Denver runs, just because they may be able to slow down Jokic at times, but I don't think it's going to be enough to slow them down consistently throughout this series. And that means that Miami's really going to have to focus on shooting a high percentage behind the 3-point line, which they've actually been doing pretty much their entire playoff run so far. If they're able to consistently knock down around 45 to 50% behind the 3-point line, they have a shot to make these games competitive. Caleb Martin, Duncan Robinson, Kyle Lowry, these guys are going to have to step up big and knock down some critical 3-point shots. Same goes for Gabe Vincent. If these guys can get into a rhythm behind the 3-point line, I think it gives them a chance to be competitive in this series. And I also have to see something from Jimmy that I didn't see at times against Boston. There were times against Boston where Jimmy looked hesitant. He did not look as assertive as he once was in some of the previous series going into this Boston series. You can look back at Jimmy, and Jimmy had some good games here and there, but there were some other games where, quite frankly, he just looked too passive. He looked too hesitant, and he was looking to pass the ball out instead of attacking and driving to the bucket. So I think they're going to have to see a little bit more aggressiveness from Jimmy. And maybe Jimmy just goes after Jokic. Maybe Jimmy just drives it into the lane, tries to get Jokic into foul trouble. And that's how they may dictate terms of each individual game. That's something that we'll have to monitor throughout each game of the series. But nonetheless, I think one thing when it comes to Miami, just one more point I'm going to make with the Heat, is the availability of Tyler Hero. Tyler Hero broke 2 of his fingers in, I believe, game 1 against the Milwaukee Bucks in the first round of the playoffs, and he's been out ever since. Supposedly, he could be available to play by games 2 or 3 of the NBA Finals. And I remember Kevin and I were talking about this at the time when he suffered this injury. Had hypothetically the Heat gone to the finals, maybe we would see Tyler be able to come back and play for Miami. Well, now that Miami's actually here in this position, I think there is a chance that we will see Tyler Hero in this series, but I think it's mainly going to come from him coming off the bench. I believe the rotation that they're running with their starters right now is something that they should probably maintain and keep at this point. And I think they should give Tyler some decent minutes off of the bench, see if they can get him into a groove, because he's going to be rusty at first, especially when it comes to an injury that he sustained, when it comes to breaking multiple fingers. You got to get him into a rhythm and give him some open looks and some decent opportunities to be able to score some baskets. So it's one other component when it comes to Miami that we'll see how it plays out over the coming days. But as of right now, just when I look at this series overall, I think Denver has the advantage when it comes to the talent on the court, but I think Miami has the advantage when it comes to the coaching side of things. Spoelstra has really proven to be just an expert level coach. And I'm fully convinced that if Miami did not have Spoelstra with this unit, I don't think they would have gotten this far. I think that Spoelstra has done an amazing job leading this group of men with the Miami Heat to this point. And I think he's just as critical to their success compared to somebody like Jimmy Butler and Caleb Martin and Bam Adebayo. So Miami has a really good unit, but I think they're really bolstered by the impact that Spoelstra brings to the table with his overall coaching. And I think a case can be made that he's the best coach in the NBA at this point. But overall, I think this is going to be a fun series. Game 1 takes place on Thursday night. It's going to be in Denver, the first 2 games, and then it goes back to Miami for games 3 and 4. But overall, I'm anticipating a fun series here. And at the end of the day, as long as it's competitive, I'm all here for it. So we'll see how things play out when things get rolling on Thursday night.